Oh, that is a major collision for the two of them. They both knock heads. It took them both some time to get to their feet.
Lexie Hull walked into Gainbridge Fieldhouse with no Caitlin Clark by her side, no full rotation of guards, and no guarantee her night would even last past the first quarter. Then, boom, she collided head-to-head with Gabby Williams so hard that the entire arena went silent. Fans braced for the worst. Was this going to be yet another blow to a Fever roster already limping through the season? Everyone thought Hull's night was finished before it even started, but she didn't just stay in the locker room. Minutes later, Lexie Hull came back on the court with a swollen knot bulging from her forehead, and instead of playing cautious, she threw herself on the floor chasing loose balls. That single act told the world what this Indiana Fever team is about.
Gabby and I ran into each other, unlucky. I think we both have knots on our heads, so
it's in your peripheral vision?
Yes, it was literally like sticking out. I mean, it's still big right here, but it was bigger and I could see it, so they brought it down a little.
They were not going to roll over. They were not going to let Caitlin Clark's absence define them. Here's where things flipped completely on their head. This wasn't just about toughness. This was about identity. The Fever had lost 4 of their last 5 games and sat on the edge of the playoff picture. Seattle was right above them in the standings. Every possession mattered. And on a night built around Clark's Nike logo celebration, it was Lexie Hull, not Clark, who gave the Fever the spark they desperately needed. The irony couldn't have been bigger. Clark's face was plastered all over the arena, on banners, t-shirts, and fan selfies. But she sat in street clothes, cheering from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Hull, with a forehead that looked like it had its own zip code, kept diving for rebounds and locking down defenders. It was gritty, ugly, and exactly what the Fever needed.
Getting hit now, coming back
Oh
in.
my God.
What does that say about her?
She's just a tough young woman. If she's hurt, if she's injured, if she goes down, if she gets back up, she just always has the same expression.
And just when you thought the night couldn't get any crazier, Hull's return lit a fire under her teammates. Aaliyah Boston started attacking the rim with fury. Odyssey Sims pushed the pace like she was 22 again. Kelsey Mitchell buried jumpers that killed Seattle's momentum. The Fever weren't just surviving without Clark, they were dominating. This was supposed to be the Storm's chance to expose Indiana's thin rotation. Instead, Indiana turned it into a statement game, the kind of win that makes the rest of the league nervous.
I guess how big was it to get a win in this one?
Yeah, I mean, going into this game, we talked about that this was going to be a big game for us, considering the standings where Seattle.
When Lexie Hull checked back into the game after that collision, the crowd erupted. You could almost feel the sigh of relief turn into pure adrenaline. Hull's very presence said one thing: this team wasn't quitting. She had a giant lump on her forehead that you could literally see from the upper rows, yet she kept hounding Seattle's guards like nothing happened. That's when the entire energy inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse shifted. Instead of holding their breath, fans started standing and screaming. Indiana's bench got louder. The starters played sharper. Suddenly, what looked like the breaking point became the turning point.
Going into halftime, we just talked about just coming out, having a strong third quarter, especially first few minutes were very important. We locked into it. Everybody that came in off the bench was locked in as well. So just felt good. Obviously, feels good to get back in the win column, but very, very pleased with how we played together as a team tonight. We were really connected.
And here's the detail that makes it even more remarkable. Indiana wasn't just missing Caitlin Clark. Sophie Cunningham, Ari McDonald, and Sydney Colson were all out with season-ending injuries. Chloe Bebby was managing knee discomfort. By all accounts, this was a skeleton roster. No one in their right mind expected dominance. Yet dominance is exactly what they delivered. Aaliyah Boston anchored the interior with power moves that had Seattle scrambling. Odyssey Sims turned every defensive stop into a fast break. Kelsey Mitchell's jumper was so consistent it felt automatic. But here's the kicker: Seattle had no answers. They were supposed to be the stronger team with more depth and playoff security. Instead, they got bullied. Indiana out-rebounded Seattle 42-21. That kind of margin doesn't just happen in the WNBA. It happens when one team decides they're going to control the paint and refuses to let the other team breathe.
You guys are out-rebounded 42-21. That's one of the largest discrepancies of this so far this season. Just kind of wondering, how much does the team switch heavy, kind of aggressive attack style defense play into teams getting angles on you guys. And
Can you repeat that question? So are you asking about rebounds or are you asking about, I don't understand what you're asking about.
Hull embodied that mindset. She finished with 9 rebounds and a plus-minus of +31, the best on the team. She didn't need to drop 20 points. Her toughness and defense made her the glue that held everything together. Meanwhile, the night that was supposed to celebrate Caitlin Clark turned into a showcase for everyone else. Indiana showed the league they weren't a one-player team. They proved they could walk into a game built around Clark's superstar branding and still walk out with a dominant win without her.
Yeah, she went through our walkthrough yesterday. Today it was very short, prior to game time. But she went through it yesterday, and I want to see her in practice, live in practice.
And that's when the conversation started to change entirely. This wasn't just a victory; it was a statement. Indiana is a problem even at half strength. The real show of the night came from Aaliyah Boston. With Caitlin Clark sidelined, everyone wondered who would take the offensive load. Boston answered that question with authority. She dominated the paint, scoring 27 points and grabbing 9 rebounds. Every time Seattle tried to double her, she muscled through the contact and finished anyway. And here's where things went from impressive to downright unstoppable. By halftime, the Storm looked worn out. Indiana had already built a double-digit lead, and Seattle's front court simply couldn't keep up with Boston's physicality. Every missed shot by Seattle seemed to bounce right into her hands. Second chance points piled up, and the gap kept growing. But Boston wasn't doing it alone. Odyssey Sims looked like a spark plug from the moment she stepped on the court. Signed late in the year, Sims played with the urgency of someone who knew this might be her last big stage. She finished with 22 points and even drilled a deep 3 from the logo that sent the crowd into chaos. If that wasn't enough, Kelsey Mitchell delivered her usual dagger shots. Every time Seattle threatened to close the gap, Mitchell silenced them with a jumper. She finished with 21 points and gave the Fever a steady outside threat to balance Boston's power inside. Without Clark's deep shooting, Mitchell kept the defense honest. Together, the trio of Boston, Sims, and Mitchell made Indiana look complete. They weren't limping through the game, they were dictating it. Seattle's offense, on the other hand, sputtered. They scored just 75 points and managed only 3 fast break points all night. That's how locked in Indiana's defense was.
It started really with our defense, though. Our attention to detail was better. It was better in the second half than it even was in the first half.
Lexie Hull's collision might have sparked the energy, but Boston, Sims, and Mitchell carried it into a dominant performance. Indiana didn't just win, they dismantled a playoff team and made it look easy. And just when you think this game was only about one night, the bigger picture started to reveal itself. Indiana wasn't just collecting a single win, they were rewriting their season narrative, proving they had more weapons than anyone gave them credit for. Before the ball was even tipped, the night already felt different. The Fever walked into a building decorated from top to bottom for Caitlin Clark's Nike logo reveal. There were banners hanging, branded shirts on every seat, and fans taking selfies in front of Clark backdrops. The entire arena screamed Clark Night. But the twist? Clark wasn't even playing. That's where the irony slapped everyone in the face. This massive event built around her star power ended up spotlighting the players who were actually on the floor, and they seized that spotlight. Instead of folding under the weight of the spectacle, the Fever used it as fuel. Stephanie White, the Fever's head coach, had talked earlier in the week about how tough it was to run the offense without Clark's ability to stretch the floor. Losing her shooting and playmaking forced Indiana to change their style completely. That's why Boston's aggressiveness inside became even more crucial. She wasn't waiting around for someone else to create looks. She demanded the ball, backed defenders down, and scored anyway. But the story wasn't just about offense, it was about toughness. Lexie Hull's return from that brutal head collision showed the blueprint: grit, defense, and effort. Every player followed that example. Indiana's rotations tightened, their box outs got fiercer. Suddenly, Seattle wasn't just facing 1 or 2 stars, they were facing a team with an attitude. Even players who didn't dominate the stat sheet made their presence felt. Bench players fought for rebounds, pressured Seattle's guards, and gave the starters just enough support to keep the intensity high.
Going into the West Coast trip, right now we're just going to be focused on LA. That's kind of been our motto this entire season, is just focus on the game ahead of you, be where you're.
It was a full team identity on display, and that's what made the victory feel different. Indiana wasn't surviving until Clark returned. They were proving they could build a foundation that works with or without her. And the real question hit hard right here, when if this is what Indiana can do without their biggest star, what happens when Clark finally comes back? Seattle came into the game thinking they could exploit Indiana's thin guard rotation. On paper, it made sense. Without Caitlin Clark and without 3 other injured guards, the Fever looked like a team with holes all over their lineup. But once the game started, it was clear the Storm had underestimated them badly. That's when the plan completely backfired. Instead of Indiana being exposed, it was Seattle that looked overwhelmed. Their guards struggled to penetrate against Indiana's swarming defense. Their front court got bullied on the glass. Every time Seattle tried to create a rhythm, the Fever snatched it away. By halftime, the rebounding margin told the story, 42-21 in favor of Indiana. That's a beating you rarely see in professional basketball. Aaliyah Boston was snatching rebounds over multiple defenders, while Lexie Hull and Odyssey Sims cleaned up every loose ball. Second chance opportunities piled up, and the Storm's frustration became obvious. And the Fever weren't just defending, they were dictating pace. Odyssey Sims turned rebounds into instant transition chances, sprinting down the court before Seattle even knew what was happening. Kelsey Mitchell's shooting kept the floor space just enough so Boston could keep dominating inside. The result? Seattle never found an answer. Their offense got stuck in mud. They finished with just 3 fast break points the entire game. Indiana, on the other hand, kept scoring in waves, stacking up a lead that grew larger with every quarter. What makes this so important is that it wasn't just a lucky shooting night. It was Indiana showing a formula that works. Tough defense, relentless rebounding, balanced scoring across multiple players. With Clark out, they found another way to win. And not just win, but dominate. And that's why this game meant so much more than just a number in the standings. It proved Indiana could adapt, it proved their roster had depth, and most importantly, it proved they weren't dependent on one superstar to set the tone. The defining play of the night still came back to Lexie Hull's collision. Early in the first quarter, she and Gabby Williams went diving for a loose ball under the rim, and their heads smacked together with a sound that echoed through the arena. Both players hit the ground hard. Williams stayed out, but Hull walked to the locker room holding her forehead. Cameras zoomed in, and you could already see the swelling start to balloon. Everyone in the building thought the same thing. That's it, her night is done. And honestly, no one would have blamed her. Indiana already had half the roster in street clothes. Losing Hull, their defensive anchor, could have been the nail in the coffin. But a few minutes later, to the shock of everyone, Hull came jogging back onto the court. The lump on her forehead was impossible to miss, but her energy was untouched. First possession back, she dove across the floor for a loose ball like her head wasn't even throbbing. That single act flipped the entire energy of the game. Her teammates fed off it instantly. Aaliyah Boston said afterward that Hull was the definition of tough. Stephanie White called the hit disgusting, but praised Hull for never showing pain, always competing like nothing happened. Even the GM and teammates on the bench just stared at the size of her forehead bump in disbelief, and then cheered when she kept battling anyway. And here's the part that really made her toughness unforgettable. Hull finished with 9 rebounds, the most by any guard in the game, and led the team in plus-minus at +31. She wasn't the top scorer, but her presence disrupted everything Seattle tried to do. She hounded guards, boxed out taller players, and turned every hustle play into momentum. Fans who thought her night was over got the complete opposite.
Yeah, I feel like Lexie's the definition of tough.
Yes.
I think when you just think of her as a player, the way that she hustles, she likes to get loose.
She wasn't just in the game, she was the spark plug, and in a season full of injuries, that toughness symbolized exactly what kept the Fever alive in the playoff chase. When people look back at this game, it won't just be remembered for the scoreboard, it'll be remembered for the statement it made. Indiana didn't just win 95-75, they completely owned every category. The Storm weren't just beaten, they were dismantled. And here's where the numbers tell the whole story. Indiana shot 22 for 26 from the free throw line, while Seattle only attempted 15 free throws all night. The Fever also dished out 22 assists on 36 made field goals, proving this wasn't just one player carrying the load, it was teamwork at its finest. Kelsey Mitchell hit a new franchise record for most points in a single season. Aaliyah Boston logged her 1,000th career rebound, cementing her place among the league's rising stars. Even Odyssey Sims, a midseason season pickup looked like she had been running the system for years, and yet the box score can't capture the energy inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse. This was supposed to be Caitlin Clark's night, built around her Nike logo debut. Instead, the crowd got a crash course in how deep this team's grit runs. The cheers weren't just for Clark's banners, they were for Boston dominating the paint, Sims bearing logo threes, and Hull diving headfirst after loose balls with a bump the size of a golf ball. The real kicker, Indiana swept Seattle 3-0 on the season. That moved them up to 6th place in the playoff standings, right in the middle of the race. For a team that just a week ago looked like it might slide out of contention, this was a seismic shift, and the symbolism couldn't be clearer. Indiana doesn't need everything to go perfectly. They can win ugly, they can win shorthanded, and they can win when the night isn't even designed for them. That's the kind of identity that scares opponents. And just when it seemed the Fever story had peaked with this win, something else happened off the court that changed everything again. While the Fever were celebrating their most complete win in weeks, another piece of news broke that made the night even bigger. Caitlin Clark, who had been sidelined since mid-July with a groin injury, was finally back on the practice court. For the first time in over a month, she joined her teammates in live workouts. And this wasn't just about shooting drills or casual warm-ups. This was the real deal. Clark was tested in full contact practice situations. That meant defenders leaning on her, driving into traffic, and pushing her endurance. For a groin injury, those are the toughest boxes to check, and according to Stephanie White, this was the final hurdle before she could return to actual games. White explained it clearly. Clark had already been doing walkthroughs and light conditioning, but this was about sustaining game-level fatigue without breaking down. When we get tired, our body looks different, White said. We wanted to see how she handles contact and fatigue at the same time.
To make sure that there's no regression, and as most of us know, when we get fatigued we look different, and see how she plays through fatigue.
The timing couldn't be more urgent. Indiana only had 6 games left in the regular season, and the playoff standings were a mess. Sitting in 6th place was better than falling out of the bracket, but one bad week could still knock them down. Having Clark back, even for the last handful of games, might be the difference between sneaking into the postseason or falling just short. And the contrast couldn't have been sharper. On one side of the arena, Clark's Nike logo hung from every wall, reminding everyone of her cultural power. On the other side, she sat courtside in sweats, cheering her teammates while they dominated without her. The brand was alive, but the player was still missing. That image told the story of Indiana's season, surviving the wait for Clark while proving they're more than just her highlights. But now that wait was almost over. Clark's return wasn't just a headline, it was the missing piece of a puzzle that suddenly looked dangerous when complete. And here's where the Fever's ceiling suddenly shot way higher than anyone imagined. The urgency around Clark's return wasn't just about star power, it was about survival. Indiana's margin for error in the playoff race was razor thin. One small losing streak could erase all the progress they made against Seattle, and everyone in the locker room knew it. That's why Clark's timeline suddenly became the most important story in the league. Stephanie White made it clear she wasn't rushing her back just for headlines. A groin injury can linger if not treated properly, and the last thing Indiana wanted was a setback that would cost her both this season and next. That's why they wanted multiple practices before clearing her, but the buzz was impossible to ignore. Clark had already been out for 16 straight games, the longest absence of her career. Seeing her back in uniform during practice, even in a limited way, sent waves through the fan base. Suddenly, fans weren't just asking if she'd return, they were asking when. Meanwhile, the Fever players didn't let the distraction change their approach. Aaliyah Boston said it best. The team's motto was to be where your feet are. That meant focusing on the next game, not the big picture. First it was Seattle, then Los Angeles, then Phoenix, one step at a time. But here's where things got even more interesting. Indiana's recent dominance without Clark wasn't just buying time, it was creating options. Instead of rushing her back and putting everything on her shoulders, the Fever now had a formula that worked. Boston inside, Mitchell outside, Sims pushing the pace, Hull bringing the grit. Adding Clark back into that mix wouldn't be a desperate patch, it would be a weapon. That shift in narrative changed the tone of the entire season. The Fever weren't the desperate team clinging to Clark's every move. They were a rising playoff threat that just happened to have one of the best players in the game waiting to return. And the moment Clark finally steps back onto the floor, that balance could tilt the entire playoff race. By the time the final buzzer sounded, it wasn't just a win, it was a blueprint. Indiana showed they could defend at a high level, rebound with dominance, and score efficiently. All without Caitlin Clark. That's not just survival mode, that's playoff basketball. And here's the twist that really flipped the narrative. The WNBA had spent weeks talking about Indiana as if they were only Clark's team, but against Seattle, the Fever proved they were more than one superstar. This wasn't about one player carrying them, it was about a collective identity that could punch anyone in the mouth. Lexie Hull became the symbol of toughness, shaking off a head bump that looked like it belonged in a boxing match. Aaliyah Boston became the enforcer inside, carving up Seattle's defense until they had no answers. Odyssey Sims became the wild card, the unexpected scorer who added chaos at exactly the right time, and Kelsey Mitchell became the steady closer, draining jumpers whenever Seattle tried to claw back. But what makes this story even better is the timing. Indiana wasn't just picking up a random win, they were climbing the standings right when it mattered most. The Fever swept Seattle 3-0 on the season and vaulted themselves back into playoff position. That changed the pressure on every other team around them. Now imagine this, a Fever team that can bully opponents inside, push the tempo, and defend with grit, and then add Clark's shooting, passing, and playmaking on top of that. That's not just a playoff team, that's a team no one wants to face in a first-round series. The Seattle game was supposed to be about Clark's logo. Instead, it turned into the night Indiana reminded everyone that basketball is still won on the court, not in marketing campaigns. And as Clark inches closer to her return, this might just be the moment we look back on as the turning point for the Fever season. The scary part for the rest of the league is that Indiana pulled this off while running on fumes. No Clark, no Cunningham, no McDonald, no Coulson. Chloe Bubby still managing discomfort. This was a roster held together by grit, tape, and sheer willpower. And yet, they still looked stronger than Seattle at every position. That's what makes this win so telling. If Indiana can dismantle a playoff caliber team with half their roster missing, what happens when they're finally whole again? Stephanie White's post-game speech hammered this home. She praised the ball movement, the toughness, and the fact that Indiana made more free throws than Seattle even attempted. That's not luck, that's discipline. That's the kind of stat that wins in the postseason. Lexie Hull, still joking about her forehead lump afterwards, said she didn't care how she looked. If she could play, she would play. That mindset bled through the entire roster, Boston battling through double teams. Sims attacking like a rookie, trying to prove she belonged. Mitchell calmly knocking down jumper after jumper. But here's the bigger point this night revealed. Indiana doesn't just have stars, they have layers. Boston is the franchise cornerstone, Clark is the global phenomenon, Mitchell is the reliable scorer, Sims is the spark, Hull is the glue. That's not a fragile structure depending on one player, that's a foundation, and for a franchise that's been rebuilding for years, this was the first time it truly looked like the blueprint had arrived.
I felt like this was, as close to 40 minutes as we've put together consistently in a long time.
Not potential, not hope, actual results. A 20-point statement against a team they're fighting for playoff position with. And now the rest of the league has to pay attention because Indiana isn't sneaking up on anyone anymore. What Indiana showed against Seattle wasn't just about a single win, it was about sending a message. For weeks, the Fever were treated as a one-player story. Without Caitlin Clark, the assumption was simple, they'd fade. But on a night meant to celebrate Clark's brand, her teammates flipped the script. And this is where the story turns into something bigger than one game. Indiana proved they can fight with half a roster. They proved they can defend with edge, rebound with muscle, and score in waves even when their best shooter is out. That's not just grit, that's identity. Lexie Hull embodied toughness by coming back from a collision that would have sidelined most players. Aaliyah Boston put her stamp on the paint as the dominant force she's becoming. Odyssey Sims gave the team speed and confidence. Kelsey Mitchell provided the steady scoring touch that balanced everything. Together they turned what should have been a difficult night into the most convincing win of their season. And here's the part that makes it dangerous for everyone else. Caitlin Clark is almost back. Her return doesn't just add points, it adds space, vision, and star gravity that tilts defenses completely out of position. Pair that with the version of the Fever we just saw, and you're looking at a team capable of flipping the playoff race upside down. So the real question now is simple. If this is Indiana shorthanded, what happens when they're at full strength? For the first time in years, the Fever aren't a rebuilding story, they're a rising threat. And if the Seattle game was the turning point, the rest of the league better start preparing now. If you've been enjoying this breakdown and want to keep following the biggest stories, don't miss the next one. Hit that subscribe button to support the channel and stay locked in on every update. Thank you.